1:17 time then, Murray Mexted, great old mate of the show. He wore that number 8 All Black jersey from the time that he made his debut till the time that he decided to call it quits. He never missed a single match for the All Blacks, and involved in that was something like 35 or 36 consecutive tests. Mex, you've just heard Jeff Wilson there. What are your thoughts on what he was saying?
Yeah, well, I think he's a winger talking about loose forwards. You know, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? You know, Jeff was an outstanding rugby player and he's now become a fantastic colour commentator. And I guess it's provocative. Commentators sometimes feel they have to be provocative, and I think that's one of those comments, you know. And he's talking about a position that that he's not an expert in, he's never played in. He was a great finisher and try scorer, and actually quite creative finisher as well. But I don't think he knows the art of loose forwards. If you asked him what the role of the 6th, the 7th and the 8th were, and it's not just Jeff, it's any commentator that plays on the outside backs. And you'll notice at the moment at Sky, most of them are outside backs. Muliaina, JK, another example, Kaltanana. So, you know, they don't necessarily know about the role of those various loose forward positions. And I think that Ardie, and I do know about that role, and I know Ardie Savea because he attended Irons. And he is, by the way, the role of the open side flanker and the number 8 is to retain possession when we've got it and regain possession when the opposition have got it. So you've actually got to be a bit of a hunter and a gatherer. You've got to be targeting that ball, and you've got to make sure we keep it. Now, Ardie's great in that area of the game. Sam Cane is fantastic as well. You know, so those and I actually think Blackadder, that's his best position because he's a hunter and a gatherer as well. And those guys stand out. Christie also is very, very good at that role from Canterbury. He's a bit smaller than the other guys, but he's very good at it. So we've got plenty of open side flankers. We haven't got too many number 8s. And that's where I see a problem, because when you play the big boys, and if you're going to the Rugby Championship is the big boys most of the time, but certainly the Rugby World Cup, when you're playing teams like England, you know, and France, and even Ireland now these days, they have got at least 3 and often 4 players who are capable of winning the ball in the air. And at the moment, we, you know, with playing Ardie at 8, we need a very big and dominant blindside flanker who can join, you know, Whitelock and join the great locks that we have. We have 3 outstanding locks, don't we? Retallick, Whitelock and Barrett. Barrett also, I think, would be an outstanding blindside flanker. But, you know, the business about the loose forwards is that Ardie can play the same role at 8 as he can at 7, which puts pressure on the opposition when they have the ball and make sure we retain possession and go forward when we've got the ball. So I think he's fantastic in both positions. The challenge is to get enough people that can win the ball in the air because he's probably not big enough to compete against, you know, like, for example, the French number 8. You know, he's 6'6". Kieran Reid was 6'6". Ardie's about 6'3" at the most. You know, it's one of those positions that we don't seem to have too many guys around with a lot of height. And because of that, Ardie becomes the best player at that position.
Megs, you know, you've drummed into me over the years, and I was talking about it yesterday, about the 3 roles have to be complementary. And, you know, you cannot select one loose forward. You have to select the 3 together. So are you still a firm believer in that? And in that case, then, I mean, we've got 6 as far as the squad is concerned. Dalton, the new boys, Samipeni, Finau, Kane, Ardie, Frizzell, Jacobson, and obviously the luxury of Scott Barrett, who, as you say, can play both positions. And so when we select a 23 and a 5 forwards, 3 backs split, we can put Barrett in there. It means we can effectively choose 5 loose forwards every test match, and so we can rearrange a combination. But back to the original, the complementary aspect of it. So, you know, when you're looking at, if you're looking at Ardie and Kane, who then complements those guys?
No, that's absolutely vital. You have to pick the loose forwards as a trio. Certainly the 7 and the 8 and they have to be able to play together very, very well. And the more games they play, the better they will become. The blindside flank is a little bit different, and especially the way we some attack and defence plan splits. There's a fair bit of structural stuff these days, and so the blindside flanker it's not quite so vital as long as he's doing his role. But in my view, Sam Cane and Ardie Savea are outstanding together. And like I said before, you could throw Blackadder into that mix as well. But you've got to get these guys playing together so that they can intuitively they do the right thing. They know the support. And it's absolutely vital. It's also the same with the 8 and the 9, by the way.
All right, then. Well, who's your 3? Looking at those 6, Blackadder is injured. We're hoping he comes back for the World Cup. So let's just pause him for a second because we've got the Rugby Championship. So, out of those 6 players, because you've also talked a lot about Dalton Papali'i and you like him as a potential 8 as well. And so if you have to pick 3 to start those Rugby Championship tests and keep them going, who are they?
Well, I think the last 2 games proved who they were. Those players stood up. I think it was pretty bloody obvious actually to everybody now. So all the armchair selectors, and I'm probably one of those myself at the moment. Yeah. You've got to look hard at the semi-final and the final. And what the semi-final exposed, it exposed the Blues loose forwards as being carriers of the ball, not necessarily hunters and gatherers. And the Crusaders just blew them apart because of that. That was the one reason, because they retained possession, they held hold of possession, and the Blues never got a chance to run. I mean, they're fantastic with the ball in hand, but they're not necessarily hunters and gatherers. The only one of the 3 that is a little bit inclined towards that is Papali'i in the Blues loose forward trio, and I think he needs to play as a hunter and a gatherer before he can become a number 8. So your comment is dead right. I see him as a futuristic number 8 because he's capable of playing that role. At the moment, I'd put him on the blindside flanker, and I'd put the other 2 loose forwards on the blindside flanker from the Blues. So that's, in my opinion, that's one reason why the Crusaders won that game so comprehensively. The second reason was because they targeted 3 wide from the breakdown. It looked to me like they were passing 3 passes before they attacked, and that made Enor gave him some room to move, and it was the reason he was selected. So those semi-finals and finals are pretty important to the naming of the team. Finau, for example, played his way in as a blindside flanker that no one really knew too much about till about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he's a big, strong, tough Jerome Kano type of blindside flanker, and he's someone we've been looking at. And getting back to what the loose forward exposure and the semi-finals and the finals, when you look at the Crusaders, I reckon that they're a bit short on the 8 and the 6, and that put a hell of a lot of pressure on Christie, and Christie is an outstanding open side flanker. You're talking about hunting the ball. That man's got a nose for the ball. He's fantastic. He sort of lacks the same size as maybe Jacobson and Cane, so therefore he doesn't have as much power unless he's got real support. And I think that was the area that the Chiefs had a real crack at the Crusaders. They really did have a crack. And it was a 2 and 3 men at the breakdown, and Jacobson, was just piling in with Cane, and Finau when he got his chance.
Where do you rate Frizzell in this? There were times last year, especially against the Africans, where he was big and physical, and he looked like maybe he could be that Jerome replacement. Where do you see him?
Well, he's sort of been forgotten a bit, hasn't he? Because because the Highlanders never featured in these semis and finals, which is very vital. You can only judge a player by when he plays against the best. There are a lot of players that look really good against second-rate opposition, or even one step below international opposition. A lot of players look good at Super Rugby and aren't going to cut the mustard at international rugby against France, Ireland, and England and South Africa. So so you got to take note when you see semi-finals and finals, and this Rugby Championship is going to be very, very interesting. I mean, the first game, Argentina,
not easy.
It's going to be very tough.
Not easy.
So we can judge some of these players, but I think Frizzell has stayed in the mix, hasn't he? They named him in this squad, and he wasn't featuring in the last 4 or 5 games. So you'd have to say that his reputation from before has carried through. He's a little bit hot and cold, and I think he's got to be hotter all the time, and that's what I quite like about this new player, Finau. To me, he's hot, and he's hot throughout every moment he plays, and I want to see that from Frizzell. But I mean, they're similar players.
All right, Mex, then pick them then. I mean, you're starting, obviously you've got your 7 and your 8 anchored in there, and so you're not playing Ardie off the bench. You've got Scott Barrett as he will be, available off the bench if we want him to come that, or do you select him at 6, or are you looking at Dalton or Frizzell or Finau at 6?
Okay, so you've got to start at the beginning. You've got to start at 7, and who's going to be the first guy to the breakdown, and without a doubt, Sam Cane is that man that I would put in the team right now. The other guy that's probably the second best in the country at that is Christie. He hasn't made it, so we can't talk about him. And then the next guy is Ardie Savea. So, I think it's natural for both those two to play until some big guy who's 6'6", 6'5", maybe will get away with that, 6'5" or 6'6", who can win the ball in there until he stands up and says, I'm your number 8. Ardie's the best man in that role, and he will be totally supportive of what Cane is capable of doing at that nitty-gritty area that's so important to rugby success. You don't win games unless you're bloody good at that breakdown area. Jacobson's in the loop, but he's the same size as Ardie Savea. There's bugger all difference between the two, maybe half an inch is all there is. So therefore you've got to say who's the best at that number 8 position now if Sam Cane's at open side. So I would pick Sam Cane at open side flanker. My backup open side flanker would be Ardie Savea. I'd pick Ardie Savea as my number 8. My backup number 8 would be Papali'i, although he hasn't played enough games there, and I'd be getting him to focus on the breakdown, the tackle area. Moving to the blindside flanker, these two, Finau, they're very much in the same line, aren't they, these two players, Frizzell and Finau. Jacobson, I reckon, could play open side flanker equally as well as he's playing number 8. So I think he's in the mix too. But to me, Cane, Savea, and on the way Finau played in the semi-final and when he came on the final, you'd have to play him on the blind side. If you didn't play Barrett, and there is a school of thought where if you play Retallick and Sam Whitelock and you put Barrett on the blind side, that would be pretty bloody powerful combination, and it would probably make up for Ardie Savea's lack of height at the number 8 position.
Devlin. You better believe it! The platform.